Stop the crazy sugar addiction cycle. Thank you, Nancy. I am proud of you for coming forward and asking that question. Okay. So, and this is my very main topic, right? So you know that my website is crushsugarcravings.com. Okay. So let me first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. All right? So this way here you can know that I'm not just sitting here telling you something like from, something that I studied, like a therapist or a counselor, but I've actually lived the suffering and the crazy sugar cravings for a long time. And just to let you know, I was a personal trainer and an aerobics instructor. I was a runner. I did all these things physically, right, to help me and to help other people. But when I would go on these cycles of binge eating, I wasn't really connecting it with the food, like my food choices or my weaknesses. Because I used to think, back in the day, I'll tell you, there was something they would call your free day or your cheat day. And I would think, that if I could go 5 or 6 days a week and do really good, then, let all God down, and if I go out on a Saturday night or I go to some kind of a social gathering, it would kind of be like my time of yeehaw, it's a party, and I would go on the weekend or to this gathering, and I would just go for the gusto and eat whatever I wanted. And sometimes to free myself of the guilt, you know what I would do? I would actually eat half of, I'd have like a sampling of maybe 3 or 4 different little desserts, and I'd eat the bread and all the things that I really like to eat. And then I'd eat half and I'd pass off the other half to my husband. That way there, I think mentally I was telling myself, well, you only have to be half as guilty now. So I started to realize back then, I would look at the pattern because I would get very depressed and the mood swings and the emotional would start happening, even though, again, I was a trainer. And I would really start to self-examine with the sort of questions that we ask within the program. And I started to realize it was the glycemic index, that I was giving myself these sugar spikes, and then it would make everything unstable. It would, make me unstable in my thoughts. I didn't realize the connection with the blood sugar back then, as far as really knowing what was going on, until I started to just do self-study about the blood sugar. And sugar addiction was very real for me. And I really didn't know how to get myself out of it until I brought myself to the Lord, and God would start to reveal these things from me, for me. And then what I would do is write in a journal and then take these things in prayer. And of course, sooner or later, finally, God helped me to get out of it. And still today, I want you to know that I'm still like you. I'm still that person who has to resist temptation, okay? The miracle is that the desire slips away, right? So what do I mean by that? So I'm going to give you an example. I live here in a little stone cottage on the lake. I get tons of company that come down. Am I going to start asking them to not bring things that I've given up and was able to get out of my life? Or I am just going to politely let everybody just bring everything and even serve it, believe it or not, because I'm the hostess, and ask God to give me the courage to change the things that I can. Okay? So I want to start on a spiritual level and share with you that the serenity prayer came into my life when I was 11 years old, and my mother brought me to the Overeaters Anonymous program. Now, I didn't stay with the program longer than a year, but a miracle happened to me, and Jesus pretty much took over from that point. Now, I'm not going to say that I didn't stumble and fall. Of course I did, because I was young. I was very young, and I was going through different stages in my life, at different chapters in my life is what I want to call it. And certain things would trigger and make me fall again. But I had a foundation that was created in my life by going to the Overeaters Anonymous program. And then the stronger foundation was there because I had Jesus, where they didn't really discuss Jesus, right, at those meetings. If any of you are familiar with the Overeaters Anonymous program, they don't discuss Jesus. They discuss, quote, their higher power. But you and I were fortunate enough to have a healing, powerful Jesus that we can turn to, who's compassionate and merciful towards our suffering. So getting back to that, I was able to go back to the serenity prayer and learn how to ask God to give me the courage to change the things that I can. Okay? So to answer your question, how to give up sugar addiction and those cravings, we first have to accept the things that we can't change. So I'm going to do a little bit of coaching just based on the serenity prayer. If I can't accept the fact that when I'm going to put something in my mouth that it's going to spike my blood sugar and it's going to make me crave more, then I'm really going to have to pray about it. And then once I can accept the fact of what's going to happen to me physically, now listen to this now carefully. Once I can accept that it's going to spike my blood sugar, it's also going to create instability in my mind. Because what it's doing is it's creating a spike with the sugar, and it's going to create an unstable thoughts, unstable emotions. Everything becomes unstable when we get a spike in the glycemic index. And that's what I couldn't pinpoint that earlier in life when I was instructing people and I was a personal trainer. That actually, God led to me to make that clear, because I would do good all week again, and then I would go to these social events, and even church, believe it or not, people bring these desserts to church, and I would do good all week, and then next thing I know, I'm like all over the place after going to these social events or people coming to my house and bringing stuff. So I had to ask God to give me the courage to change the things that I can, right? So I have to be able to separate myself from the temptation, right, by praying to God and realizing the consequences that it's going to bring. So this is the very first thing we want to do when we're having a hard time to admit, and I'm having a hard time to resist, right? I'm going to go to God in prayer. This is what I do. I go to God in prayer, and I ask Him to give me the wisdom in knowing the difference. See, that's the end of the serenity prayer. So I'm kind of breaking that down for you. If God can reveal to me and to you the wisdom in knowing the difference of what my life will be like, right, without those consequences, eventually God will miraculously, and I call it a miracle, that God will miraculously give us the courage to change the things that we can. And that's where you and I lack. We need to go to God, who is the one who provides that strength, right? So for the joy of the Lord is our strength. When we go to God with our sorrow, with our difficulties and our problems, and we're able to ask God to help us to change the things that we can, then guess what? Eventually, He gives us the courage to change the things that we can. Isn't that awesome? So to answer your question, we first have to be able to admit, of what's going on. And once we can accept, what the sugar is doing to us, then we need the courage to remove it. So what happened to me is, I'll tell you my story. I used to still have like the white stuff in my house. I would buy like the healthy stuff for me, and I would still give the unhealthy stuff to my kids. And or when company would come over, I didn't want to feel like I was depriving them. So I would always, kind of have like my healthy version and, give them whatever they wanted, So, and then I started to realize, well, maybe I'm not being fair. Maybe if I could figure out how to make the healthy version for everybody, and then everybody would feel like, they had their favorite whatever. So that's the next step, is first to accept the things that we can't change and realize that if I'm going to keep eating sugar or things that are going to spike my blood sugar, that it's going to cause, I'm going to be unstable. I'm going to be unstable with my eating. I'm going to be unstable with my emotions. I'm going to be unstable with my thinking. But if I can figure out what can satisfy me and my kids, then I'm going to, give them the healthy version. Okay? So that would be the first step, is pray about that. Pray about how to get out the junk. Now, I'm not talking about for company, because I still have company that wants to bring theirs, and that's fine with me. But as far as for you at home in your everyday living, in your everyday food intake, consider getting it out of your house and looking for the healthy version. Okay? So what I did is, when I realized what was really going on in my home, I literally took a trash can and a trash bag, and I threw out my white flour, I threw out my white sugar. Those were the first two things I did, and that was, I want to say, around the year 2002. So that's about 18 years ago. And I said, never again. I don't want the white pasta. I don't want the white rice. Of course, if you have, people at home. So let me share something else. If you have people at home, you have a husband, he likes his white stuff. My husband likes his white stuff. He still has white rice once in a while. He still has white bread once in a while. But what it is he has his designated area where I don't really go in and look, So if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So that's another tip, okay? So if you have to deal with it at home and you can't get rid of all of it in the trash, then my encouragement would be to let your spouse or your better half have their designated area so that you don't see it. Okay, so that's what he does. He has his designated area. I mean, I might see it when I go in the fridge and stuff like that, but to be honest with you, once we allow the Holy Spirit to change us, right? This is where I teach about mindful eating and allowing the Holy Spirit to transform our mindset. Now, my mindset is always going to go to the consequence. See, that's where in the Real Food, Real Faith Mindful Eating Challenge, I remind you that we're not here to count calories, or we're not here to count points. What we're doing is we're always going to look at the consequence, right? And what's the consequence? I think the worst consequence at all is the emotional breakdown. I mean, I used to remember getting so depressed and was like, I just want to cry. It's like, get me out of this vicious cycle. Please, God, please. So don't be afraid to cry to God and ask God for help, because you will be attacked by Satan. Satan wants to kill and destroy us. And how is he going to do that? By robbing us of our health, because health is equal to freedom. And if we don't have our health, then how are we going to enjoy this life that God has blessed us with? Okay? So to continue to answer your question, Nancy, the first thing we want to do is get it out of the house. If you can get it out of the house, get it out of the house. It's no different for an alcoholic who has alcohol around the house. Because I was a sugar addict and I had to get it away from me. So we don't have types of sweeteners that will spike my blood. As far as the bread goes, I'm fine with that. And, you know, you have to be able to figure out what your boundaries are. So that's the next step, is that as individuals, we establish our own boundaries. And that might be a little different for everybody. But I would say if you have an addiction to sugar, definitely don't take that first bite. Because once we take that first bite and we get that sugar spike, that's what's going to cause us to keep going into this vicious cycle that we need to break. So instead, we need to find out what we can do to satisfy those cravings. So for an example, you can still do fruit. Now, a lot of people on the keto diet go very strict, right? And they don't want anything at all. What you can do, according to this booklet, if you looked at the guidelines, you can still allow yourself healthy carbohydrate, but you're limiting it to certain portion, right? So I call it a serving. That's another thing. I don't want you to get so caught up into like measuring or weighing your food, but that you can basically know what a serving is. So that would be like, you know, one slice of bread. So you can still allow a certain amount of carbohydrate in your diet, but just know that it should be a healthy carbohydrate. Okay, so that's where I talk a lot about junk food. We want to get that processed food and that junk food out and anything that spikes the blood. And instead, we want to consume something that's going to be real food. Okay, that's something that God created and something that's not going to spike your blood. Okay, so you still can do portion control and certain amount of servings a day, which will keep the blood sugar stable.